What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to share with you how I make my square turn lidded boxes. First, we're going to find center on both sides, drawing a line from corner to corner. And then we're going to take a scratch awl and we're going to make a little registration point to make it easier to mount this between centers. Right after that, we're going to use a compass and we're going to draw a circle, which is going to help to locate the additional mount points for turning it between centers. And here you can see me using the compass to make sure that those points are going to stay, those points won't get turned away. So then I use my scratch awl to help make accurate registration points for mounting between centers on the other 4 axes. And these lines, these arcs that I'm making now, are really just guidelines. So those are going to show me when to stop cutting and help me to get my corners to line up better. So to do this kind of project, you're going to need some very small live centers and drive spurs. This is a 1/2 inch flexible point center from Nova, but you could use any similar sized drive spur from anybody. And this is my Robert Sorby live center system, and you'll notice that cutter has a cup around the point, and that's really important because using just a pointed, using a live center with just a point could potentially split the grain, and the places where you're mounting this is pretty close to the edge. So we're going to get this mounted on the lathe, and it's really important throughout this entire process that you always make sure that you check the position of your tool rest, because turning something this far off center, that could go south on you real quick. Now that I have it all mounted up, I'm going to check and make sure that my tool rest is in a good spot, and then I'm going to go ahead and get started with this. Now, if you haven't turned off center before, this might seem a little hair-raising at first, but you'll notice that this first cut that I'm making is very tentative. So I kind of extend the tool out just a little bit and try to take light passes. This isn't the kind of operation where you need to be taking heavy passes anyway, because the location, the mount method between centers, once you get past the first 2 sides, you're going to see I don't know. I don't want to call it janky, but it's not a super secure method because part of the face of your live center and drive spur are actually not going to be engaged in the wood. So that's something to keep in mind. So it looks like we've made our first side here. So we're going to go ahead and mount it in the next set of points. And you'll notice that the marks from the mounting between centers, they're pretty close to the proposed edge of our project. This is why you definitely want to make sure you use something that has a ring of teeth around the point so that it doesn't split those pieces off. Now we have it mounted up, we're going to go ahead and turn that second side. Remember, it's always important to check the location of your tool rest. Check where your tool rest is. It's almost as important as making sure that you are always aware of where your hands are when you're turning in this fashion, when you're cutting a lot of air. So again, we're going to use some light cuts and we're going to start to smooth this out. And you'd be surprised at just how quickly you remove the material. Now, of course, in this video, I have truncated the footage pretty severely to make sure that I could get it down into a short enough video. I'm seriously considering putting out a longer video with more detailed instructions, possibly. That's just something that I'm going to have to look into whether or not I can get that done. But obviously I had to shorten this one up. And again, check your tool rest position. Yes, it bears mentioning that much. Now, something else that I'm going to mention while I'm turning this other side is the fact that the first attempt that I made with this, I did with cedar. And cedar is a very soft wood. It's not really a good choice. I would definitely not recommend that you try cedar for your first go at it, unless you're very, very good with your tool control. Not saying that I'm super good with it, but I'm just saying it did not make it any easier to achieve this. And if you've never done this before, you really want to stack the cards in your favor. So use a hardwood, preferably like a cherry or a maple or something like that. Even even the walnut, and I also made one out of mahogany because those are fairly open grain woods. They did present a little bit of a problem, but that's not to discourage you from trying. It's just I suggest that you try something with a fairly tight grain for your first go at it. Now, I think I've pretty much got to the point where I'm pretty happy with my process as far as creating the four sides and getting the corners to match up pretty nicely. The next thing I'm going to be working on is really working on my tool control and technique so that I don't have to sand as much. So once I get through cutting this side, you're going to kind of see what kind of surface we have. While it's not terrible, it's not great, right? So that's going to require some sanding. And also there's a little edge right there where the corners didn't meet that well. That's not something to really fret at this point because you can fix that with sandpaper after the fact. So then once we have all our four sides done, we're going to mount it between centers on center. And this is going to allow us to come back and cut a tenon on the one end so that we can mount it in the chuck so that we can continue to work on the project. And like I said, these little places right here on the side, you can work those out with sandpaper. So you can see me here using a beading and parting tool. I'm just going to go ahead and remove a little bit of material and then cut a little bit of a dovetail on my tenon so that I can mount it in the chuck. Because you want to make sure you have a good secure mount because we're going to be doing lots of operations to the other end of it in just a little bit. So here you can see me using a Forstner bit to cut the initial recess that I'm going to use for inlay. I'm going to be refining this later with a square nose scraper. So once I have that initial hole drilled, I'm going to go ahead and take some measurements with a caliper. This is going to help me to size the piece that I'm going to use for my inlay because we want a really tight fit here. And here you can see me using some pressure sensitive PSA tape, pressure sensitive adhesive tape, basically double stick tape. And I'm going to go ahead and use that so that I can mount the piece that I'm going to use for the inlay. Now you could use a bigger piece of wood for the inlay, no problem, and you probably could get away without the tape. But I like to use these little pieces. I have like a little bucket by my lathe, and when I part things off, instead of throwing those away, I chuck them in this bucket. So I have lots of, fairly nice materials, some plain stuff too, in this bucket. So on these occasions, I can use that instead of having to go to the store and buy more wood or cutting up bigger pieces of stock that I could have done something else with. So when you're mounting this, put your fingers, your two fingers on opposing sides, and you can kind of get a good feel for where center is. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, this block isn't even really square. Once you have that mounted up, you can go ahead and round it out. I typically will take the corners off. I'm not really sure if that's all that necessary, but that's just the way that I do it. So I take those corners off, and then I start to size basically a tenon, right? That's a little bit longer than the recess that I put in the top of my box. Now, while I'm doing this in the video here, I just want to point out that the order of operations could be improved a little bit from what I'm doing in this video. For instance, before you drill the hole in the end of your box body, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and cut away those marks from your live center. Just saying. So another thing I want to talk about too is that when you're using a caliper, when I use a caliper for things like this, I don't go all the way until the caliper fits. I stop just early and then check with the part because sometimes it's off a little. Then you can just use a putty knife or something to part it off. Now here I'm using a spindle gouge, and what I'm basically doing is hollowing out the center. Now this material is going to go away anyway when I hollow out the box, but hollowing it out at this point really helps because if for some reason the piece of wood that I'm going to use for the inlay isn't perfectly flat across the bottom, then it has somewhere to go. You can still see those marks from the live center. Definitely want to turn those away, because I actually didn't turn that all the way away into the the final piece. You can kind of see a little bit of that still. So you want to get rid of that early. So just to make sure it doesn't come back later to bite you. So now I'm using I'm using a spindle gouge, and I'm going to go ahead and start to level this out. I like to use those little pieces for things like earrings and pendants and, well, inlays. So I'm going to go ahead and thin this out just a little bit, and then I'm going to use a parting tool to pop that centerpiece out so that I can save it. You don't necessarily have to do that. You could just as easily turn it away. Then I'm going to use a square nose scraper to clean up that edge and get to the final diameter of the opening where the lid's going to fit. And using the same spindle gouge, I'm going to clean up that face just a little bit. So at this point, I'm deciding just how big I want my box to be. In this case, it's 1.5 inches tall. I really like the shorter ones best. So I'm using a parting tool just to establish that shoulder. You don't want to take away too much material there, because you need the support for the next step, which is hollowing the box out, that you can see that I'm doing here with a 3/8 inch bowl gouge. And basically what I'm doing here is removing the bulk of the material. I'm going to go back with that same square nose scraper and clean up the sides and get nice straight sides and pretty flat bottom and a nice corner where they meet. Now, while I'm continuing to refine the inside, I'm going to go ahead now and take a moment and mention to you that I'm actually going to be doing a giveaway and giving away this particular box that I'm making in this video. So the details are going to be in the description box below, as well as probably on Instagram. So be on the lookout for those things if you'd like to own this box. So like I said before, inconsistencies in the places where your flat faces meet at the corners can be resolved with sandpaper. And for this initial sanding, you really want to use a platen. In this case, I'm using a block of MDF wrapped with sandpaper, and that's going to keep those faces nice and those curves on the faces nice and smooth. You definitely don't want to try to do the rough sanding part by freehand. So now we're using my little mandrel again with some double stick tape, and we're going to start to turn the piece that we're going to use for the lid. This is a piece of spalted maple. It would have been too small to do anything else with, but it's perfect for this application right here. Now you could use a caliper to help with sizing these things, but I find that just sneaking up on it tends to work a lot better. So, but to each their own. And for this lid, you want a fairly tight fit. Not too tight, but pretty tight, because you're going to use the body of the box to hold it in place to shape the top of the lid. And also, while you have access to the bottom, this is a good time to shape it or decorate it or whatever you're going to do. Whether you're going to put texture there or just put a little hollow like I did, this is the time. And then sand it a little bit, while it's still on the lathe. Then you're going to part that thing off, and then we're going to get that mounted into the box, into the body of the box. But before we do that, we're going to take a measurement with a caliper to make sure that we can make a mark on the drill bit so that we don't drill through the lid, because one too many times I've had the point of a brad point bit pop through, and that's really annoying. So we're going to pop that in there, and I realize that this is a tight fit, but don't worry. This will get resolved later. You'll be able to get that out, no problem. Now we're drilling a 1/4 inch hole for the lid, and also the method to pull this thing out of there once it's shaped. So you go ahead and shape it now. I like to cut the very edge of it to be as flush as possible with the surface. I do that by rubbing the bevel of the spindle gouge right on the inlay band and then just cutting up towards the center. Now you go ahead and sand it here, but I didn't get any footage of popping that lid off, but basically you just take your 1/4 inch bit and put it in the hole and apply a little bit of pressure at an angle and it'll pop right off. Then, as you can see, I parted off the box. I'm using the calipers to get an idea of the size of tenon that I need for my jam chuck so that I can put the body of the box back on this jam chuck and work on the bottom. And, take a little finesse, just like always. I don't trust those calipers. I just use them to get close. Now, it does take me more than one time to get this fit, but, magic of editing, right? So I'm going to use the spindle gouge at this point, and I'm going to, flatten off those points on the outside, the square edge, the square points on the bottom of this piece. And then I'm going to use the same tool to create a little bit of a hollow in the bottom. I always try to do that because although this wood is very dry, in the case that it wasn't, if you make it flat and it warps it all, then it won't sit flat on a surface when you put it down. But when you put the hollow, it sits on the edge and it's less likely to rock. So that's always good practice. And then I'm going to use a little bit of fine sandpaper to ease the edges just to make it, to make it nicer to the touch. And it's on there pretty tight, so you just got to work on it, get it off of there. So now I'm using a little piece of ebony. This is actually a pen blank that I purchased a long time ago when they were on special. And I'm going to turn a very, very small pull. Really, the design is up to you. And I just turn a very small pull with a little 1/4 inch stem, and I just glue that right into the lid, and it works out really nicely. Ebony is very nice. It polishes up really nice, and you barely have to put anything on it. It's a great choice for a pull. So now that I have that off, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the box and show you what it looks like. I'm going to use a little bit of thick CA to glue the pull on, and then I'm going to put it together so you can see. Just a quick reminder, be sure to check the description box below for details on how to enter the giveaway for a chance to win this box to have for your very own. Good luck! Thank you for joining me in the shop today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to click the subscribe button and the little notification bell so that you'll be notified when I release new content. If you'd like to help out the show, you can shop our Amazon storefront to purchase the products and supplies that I use in these videos. And you'll also find discount codes for our partners. So get out in your shops, make a mess, have fun, be safe, and dread knot and make something. Peace.